Hey, this is Simon Scriver.
And this is Nikki Bell.
We are running a virtual fundraising conference on November 19th. It's called Fundraising Everywhere, and you can find it at fundraisingeverywhere.com.
There's some amazing speakers that we've got lined up for you. We've got some names on there that you will be familiar with and some speakers that you may not have heard before, but all of them will be sharing amazing fundraising methods that are proven to work, and they will be teaching us how to do that in our own charities.
We've tried to make it really affordable for all organizations, but for small charities, it is completely free. So go look at it at fundraisingeverywhere.com, register now, join us. It will be accessible, it will be affordable, and it is amazing.
Yes.
You're listening to Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast, talking all things fundraising, charities, nonprofits, and more.
It's another guest host episode. Here is your guest host today, Sarah Lyon.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Simon Scriver's podcast. And Simon has once again trusted me, Sarah Lyon, with the control of the mic. And so I'm back, coming to you from Canada. So thanks for having me back, Simon, and thanks for listening, everyone. Today I want to talk about trust. It's almost too small of a word for the weight that it carries. We want people who need our organizations to have trust that we can help them. We want donors to feel like we can be trusted to be good stewards of not just their donations, but the dreams that they have for changing the world. Trust can be earned, broken, lost. It's a topic on the minds of many in our industry. We've seen how a social media post can go viral about why not to trust charities, how outrage towards charities can fill op-ed pages, and in some cases, how loud a politician can be in the name of righting the wrongs of modern-day charities. We know it's happening, but what can we do about it? Well, if you are Juniper Losalento, you pull your chair up to a microphone in front of Canadian senators and you start talking. Recently, I had a chance to attend a presentation Juniper did around trust, and I am so glad that she agreed to come on this podcast to talk about trust. So welcome, Juniper, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you and talk with the listeners about trust and some of the related issues that I've been thinking about that affect our sector.
So Juniper, thank you. Why don't you tell people who Juniper is?
Certainly. So by day, I work with a wonderful organization called the YMCA of Greater Toronto. And I have a few other titles that fill in my non-working hours. One of those is Vice President of Public Affairs for AFP Greater Toronto. And in addition to that, I'm also an instructor in the Ryerson University Chang School Fundraising Management Program. To say a little bit about myself, I think that curiosity is probably one of my key traits. And that is the thing that led me to take the plunge and go back to school in midlife and get a master's degree in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership from Carleton University. I just finished that last year. And so I spend a lot of my spare time both reading and writing and thinking about some of the issues that are prevalent in our sector and in our broader society and what our opportunities are as nonprofit professionals to do something about those.
Excellent. And all of that led to this past March, you going to testify in front of a special Senate committee on the charitable sector in Canada. And just what was that like?
Well, it's probably not surprising to say that I did feel a little bit nervous, but mostly I felt incredibly honored to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of AFP and on behalf of Canadian fundraisers. And I should say that this was part of very broad sector-wide consultations that this special committee did. There were others from AFP who also had the opportunity to testify. And really, one of the best things for me was actually getting these amazing messages of support from fundraisers saying, wow, it's so awesome to have somebody speaking on our behalf. And that was a little bit new and exciting. And like I said, I felt really honored to have that opportunity to represent my peers.
I want you to know I was so proud to have you doing that. So I want to thank you for doing that myself.
It was really honestly quite an honor.
Thank you. You know, I think that if there's listeners in other parts of the world that might not have politicians who want to listen to the fundraiser's voice, did you get what was the feedback that you got from that side of it, from the politicians that you spoke to?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, to set the stage, they were asking for people's opinions. They did, you know, well over 100 consultations from across the spectrum. So they weren't specifically looking to hear from fundraisers, but we were really pleased to be included and to be able to bring in both the voice of the fundraiser and frankly, the concerns of donors, so that when the Senate ultimately made its recommendations, which they did in a very wide-ranging report that came out in June, that those voices and those considerations would be represented. So, like I said, it was really amazing to have that platform, but it was also a little bit nerve-wracking because the topic that I talked about is one that's sensitive. And when we're talking about things like costs in the charity sector, when we're talking about fundraising as a profession and, oh my goodness, paying people to raise money, that can be a thorny issue for some people. So in terms of my own preparation, I was, you know, absolutely able to figure out what I was going to say and go in and be prepared. But the part I didn't know was what were the questions they were going to ask me and how was I going to respond under that pressure. And you know what, it just takes a little bit of kind of like deep breathing and those kinds of things to keep your cool. And they asked me some tough questions, and I was fortunate enough to be able to kind of hold it together and answer, again, not just on behalf of myself, but on behalf of our association and my peers.
And we'll ask Simon to link into the description of the podcast the video that you and some other testifiers to the Canadian Senate, but also the outcome. Do you want to talk about what the outcome was of that consultation?
Absolutely. So what's really exciting, and again, I know we have listeners from a lot of different countries, so all of us have a certain kind of regulatory regime within our governments that help to guide what charities can and can't do from that kind of legal regulatory perspective. And in Canada, we have this kind of patchwork of regulations. We don't have one body overseeing the charitable sector as an entity. And about every once, kind of, 20 years, so there bubbles up an opportunity to kind of look at regulations and figure out how can we help charities do better for those they serve. And this was really spearheaded, this committee was spearheaded by Senator Terry Mercer, who is from Nova Scotia, woo-hoo, your home province, chaired by Senator Ratna Omidvar. And they both have very strong backgrounds in the charitable sector. And I should say, and Senator Mercer declared this when I testified, is that he actually worked where I work now, sat in the same seat as Director of Development for the YMCA of Greater Toronto.
Not that all Canadians know each other or anything like that.
Totally, not at all. And he also played a really key role in the founding of the AFP Greater Toronto chapter.
Yeah.
And so he was very clear in declaring, his quote conflicts, but he also, it's very clear that these issues are really close to his heart. Yeah. And so the opportunity was really that the Senate really sort of opened up for our sector is how can we engage in a more productive dialogue with government in Canada about improving our efficiency and our effectiveness as a sector. And ultimately, in June, the Senate released a report with 42 recommendations about how that could be done, including the 3 recommendations that are the platform policy priorities for AFP that I and others spoke about to the Senate, and many others that we support. So what's exciting and quite unique is that we in Canada who are doing this work now have an opportunity to advance policy and legislative and regulatory change that could have a really significant impact on the environment in which charities are operating well into the foreseeable future. So that's not something that we're taking lightly.
And at the heart of all of this is that donor centricity. We're doing this for the donors. We know that in Canada, there's going to be a gap in the impact soon that organizations can have with an aging population. And so all of this is for donors, that you're doing this, we're all doing this. So more than, what I learned in the report is more than 24 million Canadians donated in 2013. Mm-hmm. But what you talked about is there was a 14% drop in trust that the money is being used wisely.
Right. So let's just, maybe we could just take a step back and connect some of those dots. So in Canada, like everywhere else, we've got an aging population. And what we know is that donors who are older are more likely to donate. So some of our colleagues in the sector have done some work and said, you know what, as baby boomers begin to age, it's likely that as much as $4 billion in tax receipted revenue could leave the sector and not be replaced by younger donors who are either not giving or giving in different ways that are not captured in that kind of tax receipted way. So in Canada, we have about $14 billion annually in tax receipted contributions. $4 billion could go away. It's a significant amount. And so part of what we need to think about is what can we do from all of these different perspectives in order to encourage people to continue giving. And that ties in, again, how do people feel about charities? How do they feel about fundraisers? What role does trust play? There is a study that was done a number of times by a foundation based in Western Canada called the Moutart Foundation. And what they do is they ask Canadians how they feel about charities, and they also ask them how they feel about fundraising. And I think what's really quite interesting is to parse those two, because there are quite a number of studies that sort of show when you look at charities up against, let's say, corporations or even governments, often their levels of trust are quite high. Particularly charity leaders are thought of, in generally speaking, quite a good light by Canadians. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Canadians are feeling good about charitable fundraising, that they're feeling good about being asked for money. And we need to understand how they're feeling, because we need to be somewhat responsive to that. And Sarah, you said before that it's all about the donors, but I would suggest to you that it's about balancing between the donors and the beneficiaries. Yeah. So, right, it's really about how do we find the right balance between, absolutely, we want to respect donors and we want to ask them in ways that, generally speaking, they feel comfortable with. But we also, as fundraisers, have a responsibility on behalf of the charities and the people we serve to make sure that we're bringing those resources in. And so figuring out what that balance is between donor centricity and making sure that we can serve those needs, and many of those needs are growing, that's a challenging balance for fundraisers, but one that's really, really important.
One of the things that, a quote that you said when we were all together in a meeting in Vancouver was that, and it goes with what you said, charities are trusted, fundraising isn't. And so we know this, we can see it in other countries that's been very out in the open, these feelings. So what can fundraisers do to help with the trust?
Well, I think about what I do, taking away all the different hats that I just talked about and thinking about what do I do as a fundraiser when I sit down with a donor, right? So at the heart of it, it's those relationships and how we build those relationships. And one of our many challenges as fundraisers is that there is a little understanding of what we do. And often that goes along with perhaps a lack of respect for what we do. And so I always think my number one job is to demonstrate my credibility and my trustworthiness as a professional to that donor or that volunteer across from the table. So that's not a technical answer to what you're saying, but I think that I need to deliver what I say to them that I'm going to deliver. And I think that if I demonstrate my commitment and my ability to do that, then they are going to trust me, and they are going to start to see that there is something behind this whole fundraising thing. And I've had the opportunity to sit with volunteers who are maybe a little bit newer to fundraising, and sometimes that's something that's surprising to them, that we do have some methodology, that we do have data that we draw on, that we do have principles and ethics that we follow. And they don't need to know all the nuts and bolts, but I do think our credibility as professionals is something really important and something that can't steer us wrong.
And I hear you, and I agree with you. I'm just thinking if you know, to play the other side, we know that Canadians, or wherever you are, the beneficiaries at some point in our lives, whether we know it or don't directly see it, we do benefit from the charitable sector. But knowing that, and you know, when you've been in the industry for a while, sometimes you just want to scream from the rooftops, where, you know, we're here, we're doing the best we can for the people that we serve. But who should be pushing that? And I say pushing it, and that's not really the right term, but, you know, is it us as fundraisers? I mean, yes, we're doing our effective ethical asks, or is it the public that needs to shift, to take that extra step to shift their mindset? Who do you think? Is it a tug of war? Is it 50-50? Is it 70-30?
It's a great question. And I like the way you posed it. And I would say we all have a role to play, but I want to just highlight something that you said, Sarah, because you talked about shifting mindset. And I think that is so important, because in the past, I think that we've all had this idea that if only people understood what we do, they would respect fundraising more, right? And I think what we've learned about human behavior is that we can't educate somebody into thinking differently. It's not about giving them the facts and figures. It's not about saying, well, actually, if I could just show you the ROI on this and let me demonstrate to you my, you know, KPIs. And it's actually not that, because people have such deeply held beliefs about charity. And if we think about the roots of charity in religion, those are very, very difficult things to change people's minds about, but we can change the way they feel about things. And I think that is a little bit more of the direction that we need to go in. I do believe that we need to prove our credibility as fundraisers, but I also think the conundrum we're in is that sometimes fundraisers are seen as too professional, right? So yeah. we're a little bit stuck. Like, are you like, oh no, these people don't know what they're doing, it's all volunteers, it's all fly by the seat of your pants, or this is too slick, it's too costly. Like, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So we can either make the decision to be more professional or less professional, and I personally would argue for more. But to your point, it's then how do we actually change the way that the Canadian public and in other countries as well feel about fundraising and understand its role in bringing resources to charities to serve beneficiaries. Like, that is not an easy thing to do, and yet that is the thing that needs to happen if we're actually going to sort of change the conversation from the negative press that we saw, certainly in the UK, that has had really, really significant impact. We've seen it in other countries around the world. We see it in the US. Canada is somewhat unique in that the narrative in Canada in the media around charity is more neutral than it is negative. And that means that we're starting maybe at a little bit of a different place, but we still have a long way to go in terms of showing people what the value is that we do and that we enable through their support.
I think one of the hard things about being a fundraiser currently, to me, outside of, you know, the work, is going onto social media and seeing a chart that people are sharing about why not to give to charities based on salaries, and, you know, wanting to just in all caps write a comment about it. So, you know, what is your advice to fundraisers who, you know, we always say don't read the comments on articles, but, you know, how can they help change their mindset and even just that culture of philanthropy within their organization around trust and trusting fundraisers? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned a couple things, because on one hand, we're talking about the public, and there's no question that's difficult, but absolutely, let's start with our own organizations. Somebody was telling me a story about, and I don't even know what charity it was, but how the fundraising department was like in the basement through a small door under a staircase, not like, it sounds like I'm exaggerating for effect, obviously, but it's no good if fundraising is shoved over into a corner.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we need, to be honest, is we need leaders in the charity space who understand and participate in philanthropy and provide leadership. And I have to say that I'm extremely lucky in my own organization. We have a CEO who understands and values philanthropy and talks to donors and sets an amazing example for the rest of our organization about why this is important for what we do. And it's not an easy thing. And this is something, I learned this too, partway through my fundraising career, is that what makes us successful in fundraising in one organization versus the other has at least as much to do with the culture in that organization as it does with any technical fundraising skills that we bring to the table. Yeah. So one thing that we can do as fundraising professionals is understand that our skill sets need to go beyond relationship building with major donors, grant writing, all the technical skills, which of course are really important, but that they need to start to encompass some change management skills, and that we have to be willing to come to the table in a collaborative way with our colleagues across different areas. We have to prove our credibility, and we have to work together to come up with solutions that are going to not only speak to the need in fundraising to bring in more revenue, but also the other pieces. And it's funny, as I'm saying this, I have the perfect example, because I'm currently working on a project here at the Y with my colleagues in our operations who run our health and fitness centers about how we can inspire more members to give. And it is not me coming to the table and saying, let's do this. It's actually sitting around and saying, let's look at this perspective, and let's look at this perspective, and let's think about what's going to work for everybody. So that collaborative model is so important, and you can't do that if you're in the office under the stairs and you're isolated from everyone else. So I think finding a way to better integrate fundraising and philanthropy as a function into our organizations is something that's going to make a big difference.
I can't agree more. And I think one of the things as I've grown in my own career that I've noticed is, if you don't have that supportive organization and that culture, but also when you're working in a small charity where you might be the ED who's also the admin assistant and the researcher and the fundraiser, or you're just a one-person shop, it's hard to sometimes get that professional development. So just to hop on with what you're saying there, I think for fundraisers, it's one of our roles to mentor others.
100%. I agree with you. And especially if you are a fundraiser who's working solo in a shop, boy, do you ever need a community of your peers around you to help you know that you're not crazy when you're trying to move forward a new idea and dealing with resistance. So I agree with you that supporting each other in this profession is so valuable. And I have to plug AFP here, because I'm involved with AFP in a number of different ways, as are you, Sarah. And one of the best things about it is that it does give you that opportunity to connect with peers and build that support network. And so, wherever you're working, find those people who are your people and start to build a dialogue, because they will help you get through those tough times.
Oh, I can't imagine what I would do if I didn't have, well, first of all, I wouldn't have a partner, because I don't think he wants to listen to it anymore, or my mother. But it's always good to have that circle of people around you who understands. And we've all been there. That's the other thing. We've all been that one person in a small shop or not in a culture of philanthropy. So you're not alone, everyone. Well, I just want to, I want to wrap up just a little here with a couple of questions. And that is, what is now that you've gone through your professional career, your volunteering, your academic career, the testifying in front of the Senate, what is your hope for the next couple of years of fundraising in Canada and around the world?
Just like a small thing, right?
Yeah, just a small thing.
I think it goes to what we're talking about, is that what I would love to see and be a part of shifting is how people perceive fundraisers and fundraising. And that is actually a pretty big aspiration, to go from, some of the things you talked about with that lack of understanding or awareness or empathy for why fundraisers should make money, let's say, to actually being respected as a profession. And so for me, I think that will do so many things, not just for me personally and how I feel about myself, but how I'm able to contribute in my organization, in my city, in my country, etc. It all comes down to needing to earn and own who we are as professionals and what we contribute, and changing that frame a little bit from the defensive kind of messaging that we're often used to. Because sure, you see those comments and somebody's making, saying something that's totally ridiculous, and of course you want to just jump in there and respond. But actually, I think it's this idea of, what is it about fundraising that is valued in our society, and how can we get other people to value these things? How can we see beyond those metrics of costs and all that kind of thing, and get to the beneficiaries and how we are helping them achieve what they need in health and happiness and all the areas that all of our charities support. I mean, it's really about making those changes on the ground. So that's really my big dream, is that we are going to be able to see some movement in the understanding of what our role is in the nonprofit sector and more broadly in society.
Juniper, I think that we can do it when we have people like you out there champion.
Well, that's very kind of you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And I feel the same about you.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything that you wanted people on the podcast to know that I didn't ask?
Well, I mean, this is obviously a really, really big topic, but I think maybe what I would suggest is just pay a little bit more attention to how you as a professional fundraiser are perceived in different scenarios. And maybe you're super well attuned to this already. But if not, just pay a little bit of attention to it and see where you think you might have the opportunity to shift the conversation into a little bit more about what we are contributing to in terms of making change in our communities.
Excellent. And Juniper, if people have follow-up questions or just want to connect with you, where could they connect with you?
Well, I struggle like everybody else with maintaining all these different platforms. The best thing is on LinkedIn. The best way is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Juniper Lo Salento, though I'm not the only Juniper. But you can find me if you Google me. And I'm also on Twitter at jberry, and that's JBERRI. And you can find me there as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Juniper, for your time.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
You've been listening to Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and head over to changefundraising.com to learn more or get in touch with Simon. Or don't, whatever. You're big enough to make your own decisions.
Hey, this is Simon Scriver.
And this is Nikki Bell.
We are running a virtual fundraising conference on November 19th. It's called Fundraising Everywhere, and you can find it at fundraisingeverywhere.com.
There's some amazing speakers that we've got lined up for you. We've got some names on there that you will be familiar with and some speakers that you may not have heard before, but all of them will be sharing amazing fundraising methods that are proven to work, and they will be teaching us how to do that in our own charities.
We've tried to make it really affordable for all organizations, but for small charities, it is completely free. So go look at it at fundraisingeverywhere.com, register now, join us. It will be accessible, it will be affordable, and it is amazing.
Yes.